Check, check, check. Nice and loud. Good. Okay, we are ready. Okay. Wainfleet regular council meeting of September 14th, 2021 to order. And I think we have to do our rise and report first because we just came out of closed session. So we'll do that first and then carry on.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the meeting was called to order at 6 p.m. With a motion to go into closed session. In closed session, information was received and discussion took place respecting a pending acquisition or disposition of land matter, and direction was provided to the township solicitor on that subject.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now ask everybody to rise for the national anthem. Okay, we'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, acknowledging the One Bowl and Spoon Treaty. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Okay, seeing none. Move to the mayor's remarks. Please note that the meeting proceedings are being broadcast live, recorded, and made available through the Township website and youtube.com. On Friday evening, I attended the 2021 Celebration of Nations and Awards of Excellence on Friday evening at the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, and that's broadcast, I think, right across Canada. It was a good show, good music. The next vaccine clinics in Wainfleet will be held Friday, September 17th and Wednesday, September 22nd in the Firefighters Community Hall. Police Services Board and Regional Council both meet on Thursday, September 23rd at 8:30 and 6:30 p.m. respectively. Our offices will be closed on Thursday, September 30th in recognition of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And our next regular meeting of council will be held Tuesday, October 5th at 7 p.m. Are there any councillors' remarks? Councillor Cridlin.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The next NPCA virtual board meeting will be this Friday, September 17th at 9:30 a.m. And again, also just to mention to everybody to please get out and vote. The voting day is on Monday, the 20th. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other comments. Adoption of our previous council minutes. Are there any comments, corrections for the draft minutes of the regular meeting of council held August 24th, 2021, and the special meeting of council held September 2nd, 2021? Okay, seeing none, the motion being that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held August 24th, 2021, and the special meeting of council held September 2nd, 2021 be adopted as circulated. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Cridland and Councillor Van Vliet. Any other discussion on that? Okay, seeing none, and we just raise our hands tonight. All in favor? That is carried. Great. Okay, we have no public meeting. We have no delegations this evening, and we're going to move directly into our staff report and recommendations, the fire staff report. And this item of business was deferred from the special meeting of council held September 2nd, 2021. The motion was moved by Councillor Gilmore, seconded by Councillor Van Vliet. We will have our chief do a brief overview of the report, and then we'll move directly into discussions. Okay, the motion being... Okay, we'll just go right into the chief then.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Before I get started, I'd like to highlight that we do have Emilio Raimondo and David Robbins from the architect firm with us this evening to answer any technical questions should council have it. The review of this report is just to highlight the progress that has been made on the project since the May meeting where we brought forth the schematic design. Construction and engineering work has been undertaken, or the construction design drawings, as well as the engineering, and the tender documents have been prepared, and that's what you see before you in the appendices. So certainly if there's any questions, myself or the project team will be happy to answer them.
Okay, questions of the chief before we have a motion and a vote? On the fire hall, Councillor Cridlin, go ahead.
Thank you. It's, again, another milestone that we're here again today looking at this amazing project. For me, I'm a numbers kind of person, so it's great. I believe we have better numbers, and that's good news, and we have better numbers, and that's bad news, but we're going to proceed with getting familiar now with these new numbers, so I'm quite excited to be at this stage. I think... I'd like to, because of the numbers that I'm looking at, one area is the barn, and it's either so obvious or perhaps I'm missing something, but I'm going to put a motion out there that all the barn development is canceled, and the project is from the project, and that it's demolished and or appropriately disposed of, and that those costs be added back into the fire hall project. I'd like to start with that.
You want to start with that motion right off before we have
Well, that helps with the
discussion, or would you prefer we do discussion and hold the motion? I guess you've done it, right? So the motion's out there?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I think for me, because of what I see for the numbers and where we've landed, if I know that that's either in or out as I proceed, that's going to help shape the room that I have in terms of what other things there are on the table. So I wouldn't mind putting that motion out there because it's so significant.
Okay, so that motion is on the floor. I need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Gilmore seconds it. And discussion. Go ahead, Will.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. Just as part of that sort of movement to a decision on the motion that was just introduced, perhaps I could look to the fire chief for his comments on the original plans for the barn and what sort of implications or what sort of effect removing it from the project at this stage would have on, one, the entire project, and two, the fire station, and I guess three, departmental operations.
Sure. If I may, Mr. Mayor. As you may recall, back when we conducted the spatial needs assessment in January 2020, the barn project was included in that. The idea behind the barn was going back to the master fire plan and recommendation out of that. Recommendation 18 was that there would be a centrally located fire department training grounds. Instead of having to build a future facility, which we know that the cost of building right now is upwards of $150 a square foot, the idea here would be to renovate the barn and repurpose it twofold for fire department training purposes, storage of equipment, as well as the association. The association has a trailer as well as a couple of sheds on the property. And as I'm sure council's aware, there's a pod sitting next to Station 2. So the barn was to be used for that storage. And as part of that, when we did the fire station design, we didn't include storage in the station design, with the understanding that the barn was going to be retained or modified. So, I mean, just for some estimates, looking at the estimate of $220,000, understand that the gross floor area of the retained barn is about 3,000 square feet, which works out to be about $75 a square foot. If you were to build that same building at current construction costs, you're upwards of $454,000. So I think the value to renovate now, as opposed to have to build later, kind of meets the needs now, as well as what has been proposed since 2015, 2016.
Okay, follow-up from Councillor McClellan.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, I went out there with you. You told me it was $30,000 to fix that building. I told you I didn't think you could touch it for $30,000. You said, oh, no, you don't understand, Councilman McClellan. Well, obviously I did, because you're sevenfold over the price that you told me to do it now. We can't afford that. We can't afford that. I'm with Councilor Crinlin. We can't afford that barn. You can put up a pole barn for a lot less than the $400,000 you're talking about.
Okay, are you looking for a response, or just that's a statement?
I just made a comment. It's
okay.
It's
Councillor Van Vliet.
So it's not 400,000, just to be clear. And one of the needs that we set out in the needs assessment was space. We have containers over in the soccer field. They have containers over here by the fire hall. They are using this outdoor canteen. So one of the needs that I think it was a firefighter, I can't remember his last name, his first name is Conrad. When he gave his delegation, he told us exactly how much it was what costs for them to go from place to place to place to place to pick up all their equipment just to do their training. I can't remember the dollar amount. I don't know, Chief, if you know the dollar amount, I cannot remember it offhand. But that was a big dollar amount to do that. And one of our needs was to put everything in one place. So if we don't do the barn construction, again, we're going in too small, because the firefighters are going to have to go all over the township to gather up all their equipment, which there's some stored in the basement here in this building. So that was where we are going with the barn.
If I may ask the chief, so we don't have the barn, we're already behind on space. Is that correct?
That's correct. The fire station was designed with the intent that the barn was going to stay, and that it was also, the barn was going to be twofold in meeting the needs, the training needs that was recognized in 2015 through the Master Fire Plan.
And so potentially we be, you know, I've said this over and over, let's build it once and be done with it. You'd be coming back to us looking for another building in 5 to 10 years, if not less, in the back to do storage and all that sort of thing, I'm guessing.
Or we pour a concrete pad and put sea cans on the property.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Van Vliet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I drove by the Grimsby Fire Station, the new one. I don't know what road it's on. They already have sea cans out. Niagara Falls new fire station, they already have sea cans out. So they already went in too small. So we should probably be learning from their lessons.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, maybe sea cans are cost effective. I don't know. I'd like to know how we got from 30,000 to 220,000. I'd just be like, back me up and explain how we missed a runway by so much.
So the initial plan was that the firefighters were going to do the work. We had a couple of contractors within. We were going to just purchase the lumber and we were going to do it ourselves. I believe it was at one of the council meetings where we were told to put that on hold pending the site plan and the construction, and it was to be included with the contract. So as soon as we included it with the GC and removed it from the fire department, those costs escalated.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore, follow up? Okay, anyone else? Councillor Van Vliet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So Chief, could we still do that? Could we still do that in-house?
In our current timeline, if we want to start building the fire station this year, the only thing we could do is cut the front of the building off and finish it later. And just leave it open to the elements while the fire station is constructed.
That doesn't work either. Okay.
Okay, any other discussion on this motion that the barn aspect be removed from the plan? Any other discussion before we vote? Okay. Councillor Gilmore?
Thank you, Mayor. If we vote to leave it in, it doesn't preclude us from making a decision about it at a later time, does it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll direct the question to perhaps the chief and the architects that are assisting us with the tender documents. Is that an item that we can put in as a, I'm not sure the right language, as an item that can perhaps be dropped from the tender at a future point in time if we are unsatisfied with final costing estimates?
I will refer that to Emilio and David as they're the ones preparing the tender documents, but I don't see why not.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and Chief Morgan, yes, that is very possible. We could create a separate price under the tender documents that would list any related work to the barn, and that would be broken out separately. And at the tender analysis stage, I would say you could reanalyze the numbers and make a decision either to add that cost in or dispel of that cost. Further to Chief Morgan's comment, if we were to leave the barn and demolish part of it to make way for the new station, then we wouldn't be able to leave it wide open. Because bear in mind, when you have a building that is left to the elements, there is a possibility of further deterioration, and inevitably the cost then to remediate could in fact be higher. Interesting fact, there was a comment, I think, from Mr. McMillan on the pole barn. We're finding with pre-engineered buildings in the current marketplace, we're seeing escalations of well over 30 to 35% in the cost of the steel and siding. So if you were to compare that today to say $75 a square foot to renovate the pole barn, if you renovate the barn, conventionally speaking, if you were to replace that with a kind of pre-engineered structure pole barn, you're probably not far off in that same cost. In fact, it might be even more money given the current market condition. So we're kind of in a unique market condition currently, and I don't think costs with this escalation, we don't see in our experiences costs de-escalating any either. So anyway, I'll leave that for your consideration, Mr. Mayor and members of council.
By separating it and dealing with it possibly later, is it going to cost more money to achieve the same result?
It very well can be, because bear in mind, by adding this project to the fire station, we're getting greater economy of scale. So, labor costs, carpentry costs would be sort of absorbed into the larger fire station. I would say if we were to leave that as a standalone building and it dependent on how the procurement would be handled, I suspect, given the size and nature of the alteration, it would likely cost more money. Again, based on the fact that you're using the economy of scale with a larger station and you have trades that are jumping between both projects and supervision from the GC, etc. So I would, in my opinion, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I would say it's probably the best time to undertake that renovation, given the circumstances, from a cost perspective.
Okay, thank you. Chief, you had your hand, and then I'll go to Councillor Cridland, and then to Councillor Van Vliet.
So to roll this into the financing now, knowing that we're going to have a mortgage for 30 years, we're looking at a cost of $6,600 per year. When you break that down per household, it's $1.75 per household per year.
Oh.
Pardon me? For the barn.
For the barn, right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, and I want to thank all the council and staff for entertaining this motion at this time. The reason I brought it up now is to find out where council decides on this chunk. So however the vote goes, that's separate from, but the discussion for me was very important to then go through the next bucket of numbers, because we have a long time ahead of us here with the, we want to take the time it takes for this. So I'm satisfied that we've heard what we need. Obviously, it's all these decisions are going to be connecting to each other. So again, just want to thank everybody for the content.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Van Vliet, you had your hand up again. Okay, no. Okay, Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Raimondo. If we were to leave this barn standing as it is, the footprint of the barn, current barn, is in the way of the parking lot only, or what is it in the way of?
David, I'll defer, Councillor McMillan, I'll defer that to David in our office. David?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the existing barn is in the way of the rear circulation drive. We're repainting approximately I believe we're getting rid of a third of the barn to make way for the driveway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other discussion before we vote on this motion on the floor? Okay, I don't see any. The motion is to remove the barn from the tender, or from the plan as it sits now, and deal with something later for storage. Okay, so all in favor of removing the barn? Opposed? Okay, that is carried. So the barn is now not part of the fire hall plan. Okay, moving on to what else? we'd like to discuss on the fire hall. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to confirm, Councillor Crillon, you said that the funds you would like allocated back to the fire hall project, though, from the barn? Is that part of your motion?
Thank you. So the motion was for whatever, like, it's out of there now, the demolishing costs, so it's going to have to be added back in. It's just noting the administration part of it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, through you, could you just repeat that? I'm not understanding.
No, thank you. So I'll repeat the motion that was on the table. I'm not sure if we have that from what the mayor said, but the motion was on the table, is that the barn development is canceled and the project is to demolish and dispose of appropriately, and the costs for that are added back to the fire hall project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to other aspects of this discussion this evening that anybody would like to address. Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I would like to put a motion on the floor that we have council members, 2, possibly 2 qualified citizens, to meet with the staff at Raimondo and Associates to do a value assessment on the fire hall. This would be independent of our fire hall planning team. There's a lot of fat in here. There's a lot of errors and omissions that I can find, and this is not what I do for a living. We have a problem here, and we need to sit down with Raimondo and his group and see what's going to happen here.
Okay, so just so we have it correctly, your motion is that we have a couple people sit down with the Raimondo and go through the drawings with them.
So 1 or 2 councilors, and if you want, we can have 1 or 2 qualified individuals from town that are builders. There's a number of them around if you want to pick 2. And so it's not, it's the taxpayers that are getting represented, and we go for this. And it's a value engineering. It shouldn't take a long time. I'm sure Mr. Raimondo and his team have done this a number of times. We need to do it and get the fat out of here.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? Okay, Councillor Gilmore seconds that. Discussion? Councillor Cridlin?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Councillor McCollum brought up the point that our current architect has probably got experience with this type of process or step. Perhaps he could speak to that for us then. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Yeah, we've certainly undertaken value engineering exercises on occasion through projects. The thing to bear in mind is, as your architects, we start off based on the program that's been given to us. So in our particular circumstance, we were provided with a design that had been approved from a previous architectural procurement process. So our role in this particular circumstance was basically to take the previous design and what had been approved and what sort of complied programmatically to your staff's requirements and those of the fire department, and basically developed it and created the technical drawings in order to move forward. Some decisions are directly related to the long-term durability and maintenance. You can certainly value engineer a building and call it reduced costs, but in some occasions those costs would then require greater maintenance and greater funds in terms of operational requirements. We've often said when you do an analysis of life cycle of the building, you could value engineer it, and we felt in value engineering, generally speaking, and this is concurred by our quantity surveyors, that when you're looking for cost savings related to finishes, material selections, equipment, you're likely going to find, if that, maybe 5% within the construction cost. Where you find complete savings is in building area. So if the building were to be reduced to bring the cost down, whatever that number may be envisioned to do so, then it would compromise your program and you'd have to rethink the overall building plan that, again, was pre-approved under the previous procurement with the previous design. So in summary, based on our experiences, value engineering certainly can be undertaken. Generally, when you look at reducing costs, it might deal with certain material finishes. For example, you might decide to remove the metal roof and replace it with a 50-year shingle. But in reality, with a whatever our slope is, 512, 612, it's a lower slope, you're not going to get 50 years out of that shingle roof. We're getting much more high wind storms. That makes the shingle roof more prone to damage. Whereas a metal roof, you're going to get 50, 55 years or longer. So that will have a reduction in life cycle of that particular component, thereby saving the taxpayer money. You can look at less expensive mechanical systems that then provide less in control, are less efficient to operate. So, you know, we certainly welcome the exercise. We've been through it. I think through this process, we feel confident that some of the choices were made were for that very nature, to provide durability, long-term life cycle, and saving costs to the municipality and the taxpayer over the span of the building's operations. But if that's the wishes of council, then we can certainly sit down and go through that exercise.
Okay, thank you. Just by way of record, how many fire halls has your company designed?
We've done close, I think we're over 7 stations. We've got 3 on the go currently, and I think we've done 5 others, including EMS stations. So, you know, we're quite comfortable in what in our approaches, and it's a strange predicament today because you've got, COVID's provided a level of escalation in the market. We're finding, quite an escalation. I mean, the quantity surveyors certainly allotted for that in the cost report, but it's still unpredictable because the supply chain's been disrupted. You're getting trades escalating prices because they're not wanting to be committal to other supply chain disruptions they may be subject to. We find that especially on the mechanical side, finding components, although we haven't looked at systems or components that are out of line, at least in our opinion. The pre-tender submission, we're still fine-tuning the package as we gear up for tender, if that's the wishes of council, and we're picking up a few little typo errors, et cetera, through the process, and have continued to work closely with Chief Morgan in that regard. So it's a strange time, and you've kind of caught in the midst of it. It's interesting. You can say you can defer the station and wait for a better period of time, but I don't think that's going to serve you any better because we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict if costs are going to de-escalate any and by how much. So the project deferral, a wait and see policy may not be fruitful at the end of the day. I mean, we can certainly look at the material palette again and see what could be removed. We spoke about taking the masonry skirt that's around the perimeter of the building out, but I mean, the masonry skirt along the perimeter of the building adds durability and reduces, certainly maintenance to the building. That could be replaced with metal siding, perhaps. So there can be things that we can look at, but it'll have an impact on the appearance, the design, the durability, the life expectancy of the building, and how that would relate to added service and maintenance cost over the years.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you were finished there, yes?
Yep, no, that's it, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, members of council.
Is this out of the 7 you designed, is this an average fire station, a luxury fire station, or a value fire station? Where does it sit?
I would say, and honestly, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I would say it's average. I mean, we take, our firm by its very nature, we tend to be a more conservative firm in terms of our approach and in terms of our designs. I mean, we can be creative, but creativity in a very conservative manner. If you look at recently constructed stations, say the one in Niagara Falls that was done recently, I believe by the firm that was hired to do the design. I mean, you can look at the material palette and the costs associated with that station, and perhaps maybe even, you can perhaps approach the department in Niagara Falls and offer, and ask for their opinion on it. I mean, we try, fire stations are municipal buildings. You want them to service the community, have a longevity, have costs that are in line in terms of maintenance and serviceability. Traditionally, most of the stations we've done were more veneer. So we've used, brick and metal roofs, common. In your particular station, we've taken 2/3 of the masonry out of the building and have used more traditional materials. I think, David, maybe you could even speak to, the material palette on the exterior and interior finishes. But I'd say in answering your question, I would say this would be an average middle of the road fire station in terms of some of the EMS stations and fire stations we have done, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and thank you. And just one more. Inflationary costs right now for construction, from what I was understanding last told, was around 5% on a $4 million build. That's about $17,000, $18,000 per month that we wait. Is that generally accurate?
I would say you're probably in the ballpark. I mean, your general escalation's around 2%. COVID's added quite a bit more, but it depends on the materials. We've, earlier in the year, availability of glass, availability of aluminum, availability of steel. We were getting prices on steel, structural steel, that was escalated 30%. We were getting prices on pre-engineered buildings that were escalated 35% because of steel siding, structural steel components availability. We're finding plastics, the acrylic compounds in plastics. They come mostly from Texas, and we just can't get them. And it has an impact on insulation, has an impact on products that incorporate plastics, stucco products. So it's just this kind of crazy time that's certainly had an impact on costs. And the unpredictability, I suspect, my personal opinion is this isn't something that's going to be put into check quickly. I think this is going to continue likely into the second or third quarter of next year if we see any stabilization of prices, right? And that's, again, my opinion, Mr. Mayor. We had a dental practice, about a 7,000 square foot dental office in Thorold closed today. And, we had 5 bidders, and we found the same thing. We found there was more escalation in the pricing that we had anticipated. And in putting queries out to the general contractors, they felt that, they were letting us know that they had this sort of uncertainty with trades and availability, and they're concerned about the market and the supply chain disruption. So I think that has an impact on how they price the project. But again, I mean, that's sort of the card dealt with us at this point in time. And I can't say, we wait a year from today that prices will get any better or any worse. It's just a crystal ball based on the economy. But
Thank you. Well, the last year has showed us, a 5% inflation annually. Excuse me. So my concern is it's already September. Winter's going to be coming soon, and I'm pretty sure that costs are inflated once we get into winter building, if you're starting to dig a hole in the ground and that sort of thing. We're already, as a township, $850,000 we've invested into our fire hall thus far, from purchasing the land, the engineering, all the work that's gone into it. I hate to see us sit and add every month $18,000 more dollars, thereabouts, to come up with a fire hall that's going to be subpar, but if we take too much more away from it, as per the engineer's comment there, we're building an average fire station. I also have concerns that, 20 years from now, they're going to look, and whoever's sitting there or in charge is going to go, man, they cheaped out on this, they cheaped out on that, and now we got to pay for that. And that's my concerns. And I don't want that. I'd like to get this thing going. We've put a lot of time and effort into it. If we wait another month or two, we're going to be into too late for building, and then next thing you know, it's springtime, and we go from there. So who had their hand up first there? Sherry? Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I feel like I'm deja vu again since 2003. That's how long we've been doing this and discussing this. And as you all may know or may not know, it has now become a running joke within the township that this is never going to get done. It's all talk. We have wasted so much time, energy, and money on reports, and more reports. And I think establishing whatever Councilor McCullen wants to establish has already been done. We've had engineers do it. We've had architects do it. These people went to school to do this. It's not our job to pick it apart. It is our job to watch the numbers. These numbers are estimates. They're going to change when the tenders come in. So these aren't set in stone. These are just guideline numbers for us to look at. I don't believe we need to cut and slice and dice another report and bring more people in and more ideas. We just need to get going. We just need to get it out for pricing, bring it back in. Let's take a look at the real numbers, which still will remain fluid. Because we keep going around and around. It is getting absolutely ridiculous in my mind. And in a lot of other people's mind. We just need to get going. I don't know what the opposition is. It's been going since 2003. It is 2021. That is a whole generation that has been going, cool, is this going to happen? Is this not going to happen? We just need to get going with this, people.
Mr. Mayor, if I can comment, with your indulgence,
yes,
members of council. Traditionally, fire stations have always been, buildings that had a very unique municipal presence, right? And I guess you could always look at a building based on its intended purpose. So, for example, when you first started this process and design, we could have come forward, or a decision could have made to say, well, you know what, we can build this fire station from a pre-engineered building, and we just want it to be a very utilitarian type of structure, right? And you could have probably gotten this building for a third of the price, right? But in reality, the decision is that you want this sort of municipal building to have some presence in the municipality, Fire stations at one time were noted as, strong community gathering spaces. They had architectural design, presence. You still see some of these historical stations that were significant buildings throughout our municipality of Niagara and regional Niagara. So, that's sort of the decision you have to make in terms of saying you've gone through this process, you've gone through design, you're looking for a building that has some unique identity and something the municipality can certainly be proud of, and decide on that basis moving forward. A decision could have been made to make this very utilitarian in nature, and then the effects and the perception of this building would be completely different in your municipality. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just want to leave that as food for thought in your making of a decision.
Okay, thank you. Mr. CAO.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, just to build on that very quickly, just on the same train of thought, and as evidenced by Mr. Raimondo's initial comments, that his firm came on board and was given direction on the nature and the structure that he is being asked to technically design in order to bring us to tender. And that sort of direction is direction that followed extensive pre-consultation. There was an extensive needs assessment that was done. There were design concepts that were brought before council on a number of occasions with opportunity and direction, input and received from council, and all that direction was shared and forwarded on to the architect in order to bring you this concept, the sort of final design to go to tender that addresses all of those sort of elements that Mr. Raimondo identified, as well as identified by council a building that will have a 75-year life, that will live for not only the current but future generations of the township. And again, I just wanted to emphasize that we are at a point now where we have sort of been progressing through this process with this council, and with respect to the proposed motion about having a sort of value assessment of the project moving forward. To date, that value assessment process has been handled by council itself, and if that is something that council by vote decides on pursuing further, perhaps the appropriate course of action, rather than pausing and going to the community and seeking input that way, I throw this out that perhaps it is a design exercise that this body of council should have directly with the architect as the sort of body that represents the public that goes to the architect and sits down and does that value assessment. So I throw that out only as an idea for your consideration as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we were at all thinking about going to the public. If that's we were just a couple of people. Is that, did I misunderstand you there? Or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was my understanding
No.
from Mr. Councilor McClellan.
No, that was not. I said two qualified people from town that were builders or designers or qualified people. There's contractors in town that we could have got. I didn't want to go to the whole town. You don't have to do that. That's a proposal. But, sir, we've heard all this. We've heard everything. What I'm talking about shouldn't take more than 2 weeks. So the question's been asked, motion's on the floor, call the vote.
Okay. Councilor Gilmore.
Unless that was a motion to call the previous question, then we can't talk about it.
It was, technically.
Go ahead.
You'll have to rescind it.
I'll
You have to
rescind.
rescind the question
I'll
for more
rescind.
discussion. That way we can have more discussion. Councilor Gilmore.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Raimondo. In your experience, should we have a meeting with your staff, 1 or 2 people? How much time would you say it would take to review this? Like, would it be an afternoon, 4 or 5 hours? Any idea?
Through you, Mr. Counselor. I would say probably an afternoon, but we can take a very sort of structured approach to it and say, okay, we can sort of disseminate the building in its parts, right? So presuming if you're going to do any value engineering, we're going to presume that we're not going to reduce the building in size any, right? So bear in mind, depending on the severity of the changes, it would certainly have an impact on our ability to revise the contract documents. So depending on, we may have to go back and revise, say we decide to shrink the building. Well, that would have a larger impact on a number of engineering disciplines. If we decide to change the HVAC systems, we'd have to change the tender documents. So we might be able to have an afternoon that we can create a list of items for consideration. Depending on their impact, we'd have to go back to the consulting team, make any necessary revisions, and that can take more time. And I would say not just time, but perhaps cost. So bear in mind, I mean, if we come back and say, well, we feel comfortable that, we've met the program, and if council's desire is to now make changes moving forward, then we would certainly perhaps review that with the consulting team, depending on the changes required. That could have an impact on consulting costs as well. But we, like I said, we can break it down into components. We can start from building area. We can start from, material palette, exterior finishes, roof, siding, window types. We can look at interior finishes and flooring. We've gone to, masonry block because it's durable versus drywall. We've already changed the trusses in the roof. And even then you can look at, if you look at the overall building cost, you can say, well, the building's what, 5 point something million, but the site development accounts for a third of it or a quarter of it. So, you buy a site, you have to service it, you have to put in your, parking and road network, landscape it. So, how much of that can you really value engineer out? I mean, we talked about using, and John McClellan's very familiar with that. We talked about using potentially a granular B recycled stone. I know Mr. Rankin sells a lot of recycled stone. It's likely about a third less of the, maybe 2/3 less of granular A. But again, if we make that decision, it's something facilities would have to support, because under recycled stone, you can't get an OPS standard for compaction. And even though it can compact well enough, it's not provincially supportable. And if there's any risk, then we can't take that risk. Council would take the risk on site development or use of granular B substance, right? But, I've looked through the drawings numerous times, David. There isn't any, from what we can see, absorbent materials that we haven't used in other stations or have used because we find they're durable and economical, et cetera. But again, we welcome the opportunity. We can sit down, we could break it up into components, disseminate it all, put those components on the table, offer some dialogue and discourse, and then make maybe perhaps some decisions if there's some required substitutions, et cetera. And on the flip side, depending on the substitutions, that could also be handled at tender. So say, for example, we have a certain product we specified, we can consider a separate price for an alternate product that would serve the same purpose, and then offer either a reduction price, and then we could analyze it at tender and make a decision on whether we choose that reduction, right? So that's another way of approaching this, sort of, look at the tender package that's ready to go analyze it, make some selections on some value engineering components, put them in the tender documents as a separate price, entertain prices at tender, and then make an analysis and substitute perhaps and garner any potential cost savings and reductions. And then that would be considered subtracted from the contract value, and you'd have potentially a reduced cost. So there's a number of ways we can do it and still keep the momentum of moving forward. And I can review that certainly with the councillors that are selected to sit down with us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gilmore, follow up.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the comments toward the end, I don't think that I'm in favor of tinkering after the fact. I just want to be happy at the front end. And I think generally I am. I'm just going to say this. I'm still a little torqued about the meeting where some of us asked for it to be reduced, and then what we were presented with was not a reduction. It was a cosmetic change that happened to come out at the same price. And, you know, at the end of that, I was sitting here trying to figure out a way to not delay this, but I was trapped. And we didn't have any, it was either delay or move forward and try to get some prices. So that's been bugging me since that meeting, and it still is. So I think to expedite this, I would make an amendment to Councillor McClellan's motion to limit the scope and the participation of this review to Councillor McClellan and the staff at Ramondo, rather than complicate it with further councillors, outside people. That'll just take more time to pull those people together. And if this takes an afternoon and we go through this exercise, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm quite content with Councillor McClellan's expertise in this area. I think we're fortunate that we have him on council. I think he's built more stuff than anybody probably in the corporation, but definitely in this room. So that may expedite this, and at the end of that exercise, if he's content, then I'm content. So if that takes a week or two, then and he's happy, then I'm not going to stand in the way anymore. Although, you know, I'm still a little bit bitter about what happened before.
Okay, thank you. So the amendment to the motion is to have Councillor McClellan and one other person be limited to those two people to attend and review the drawings. That's the amendment.
No, Councillor McClellan alone with the staff at Ramondo.
Oh, just Councillor McClellan with the staff. Oh, I thought you meant one of our staff. Okay, so that's the motion. We have a seconder for that, Councillor Cridland. Okay, any other discussion? Councillor Wainfleet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to strongly object to that. No disrespect to Councillor McClellan, but he has not been on the same page with a lot of the architects and the engineers. Not an architect, not an engineer. No disrespect.
None taken.
The chief has built buildings like this and this big. A lot of people in this room have expertise in building. Mine aren't on the same scale, but I could build a building. I've built a house. I don't think that only one of us should get a choice, an opinion, and on this whole entire building. That is not what our town represents. Our town voted all of us in, not just one person. So I will not be anywhere on board with that.
Okay, Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, through Mayor. Again, just a few more comments. My background's in risk, and so, and a little bit of numbers. So I think this exercise will reveal a couple things. It might reveal some new numbers. If it does, that's fine. We're not making changes. We're just going to have an exercise that either validates the good work that's been done to date, or, if we're fortunate, gives some option that we'll then bring to council and then we'll decide. So I don't see this exercise making any decisions on behalf of anybody. I think we're making good use of the councilship that we have in the room. So I'm going to be able to support that motion fully.
Mr. Mayor, Emilio Raimondo again. If I can speak to the predecessor councillor mentioning he was a little disappointed about the numbers, right? You know, the architectural process is kind of unique in a sense because it's a series of processes, right? So as we go through the technical drawings, and we're at a certain stage, so the drawings aren't completely finished. They're in due process, and we have the first order of magnitude, or the first, I think it was a Class A estimate, prepared. So that's prepared on certain presumptions by the quantity surveyors as we go through the process. And we had come around, I'm just going to use roundabout numbers, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think it was around 5.5, 5.4, right? But as we continued through the process and we ramped up for the pre-tender, so we were ramping up to present costs prior to this process of going out for bid, we did in fact find cost savings. So we worked extensively with Chief Morgan. We disseminated the drawings as we were ramping up towards bid. In some areas we found some cost savings. In other areas we had some escalation and there's some cost increases. So after doing that kind of balancing act, we ended up more or less in the same threshold as the, call it 50% level of drawings. Because traditionally, you know, we've had clients ask for costing at the first third of tender documents, the mid-level of preparation of tender documents at 50%, and then they've asked us for at pre-tender. So, you know, we can again reestablish an expectation of cost, and optimistically, when the numbers come in, the numbers should be close to what the quantity surveyor had predicted, right? So, you know, predicting costs at times isn't as finite as one would believe, because it's predicated on processes. And as we work through the preparation of the bid documents, we had gone through kind of cutting, refining, adding, and sent it all back to the quantity surveyor, and the end resultant was the report and prepared for this particular council meeting. So it's not like we carried on and escalated costs, and we can certainly show Mr. McClellan the exercise we had undergone and where we had cut and where we were faced with additional costs that contributed to the current cost report.
Thank you. Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, quite frankly, I don't want to go alone. That's not what I asked for. I didn't even put my name to be the guy to go. I have no problem being one of them. And I'm not sure when I'm done this is going to be any cheaper. I said there was a lot of errors and omissions. I see places that we're going to have to add money that aren't in this drawing. And that's why I'd like to sit down with Mr. Raimondo and his team and ask him why this isn't here, why this isn't here. I see things that should be on this that aren't on this drawings. And I think I may end up, nobody wants to hear this, but we may end up spending an extra $100,000. Maybe there's some places we can save some so it balances out. But I see things that are missing on this drawing that are going to put this town in bad standing. We have to put them in.
Okay, so would you like to make an amendment to Councillor Gilmore's amendment that you go with somebody else and not alone? Because right now that motion is that it's you going.
So I would like somebody else, another councillor, to come with me.
Okay, that's,
And we will report back to council. It's not, we're gonna make a decision and say, here's what it is. You gotta call a special meeting, do what you gotta do, we'll get this done. I don't wanna hold this up. If Mr. Raimondo can have a meeting this week, I'll make myself available for it.
yeah.
The other councillors can do it.
Okay, yeah, my only fear is the time frame here and, getting late
This
and all
shouldn't
this
take
sort
a
of thing.
long time.
Okay, so amendment to the amendment, unless,
No, that can be friendly. I mean, I'm
Okay.
fine with another person.
That's
It's
fine.
not gonna be me. I don't have time to wind my watch right now. So if, it doesn't matter to me, he can volunteer.
That's fine. I don't care who
okay,
it is.
Councillor Van Vliet?
I will go with him.
Okay, so the motion being then that Councillor Van Vliet and Councillor McClellan attend Raimondo, hopefully this week, and work through that and report back to council.
Perfect.
Any other discussion on that motion? Seeing none.
I still don't
Councillor
like
Van
it.
Vliet?
I just want to make it heard that I still don't like it. It's costing too much money, too much time, too much everything. And is there anything that you could just do tonight?
No, and what this is costing us right now, paper. Once you put this to tender, it costs you real dollars.
Right, but once we go to speak through the mayor,
Yeah,
once
sorry.
we go to Mr. Raimondo, that's going to cost us money as soon as we walk in his door.
Okay, that's good for
He's cheap.
conversation. Okay, the vote then, in favor of that, Councillor Van Vliet and Councillor McClellan attending this week. The motion is on the floor. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried.
Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, Emilio Raimondo here, members of council, in order to perhaps expedite the review of the documents, Councillor McMillan noted that he's noted a number of items that perhaps need to be added or were overlooked. If a simple list could be prepared and sent to our office ahead of time, we can certainly look at that. One thing to note is that when these bid documents were submitted, I would say we're more looking at about 4 weeks ago to Chief Morgan in order to prepare the report. We were continually fine-tuning and adding to them or making adjustments and coordinating them with the remaining consulting team. So by having that list of items in hand, we can compare it to the present documents and either make amendments or provide a rationale for their being there or not. Anyway, I think that would be fruitful in expediting the process. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Mayor.
thank you. Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Raimondo, if you could send them the additions that you've put on to me, I will look at them and maybe you've satisfied some or all of my questions.
Sure, not a problem. We can have that sent to you, Mr. McClellan.
Okay, thank you. So the motion is still on the floor then as amended. So we'll have that vote.
We did.
As amended, that was the amendment to it, to change from 1 to 2. And so now the motion is for the meeting with Raimondo to go over it. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor for that meeting to happen? So we voted before to change from just Councillor McClellan to you and Councillor McClellan. That was the amendment. Well, we made it friendly, but that was what we voted on for the 2. Now we're voting to carry out that meeting because that was the first. Okay, so all in favor of carrying out that meeting? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, so now I guess the rest of the fire report is going to be deferred until that meeting is completed. And hopefully that is a very fast process, and we are still excited to get a shovel in the ground this fall and get this project going before we get too late into the year and get this finished. So, okay, so a motion to defer. Councillor McClellan, seconded. Councillor Gilmore, and all in favor of deferring this to the next meeting? Opposed? That is carried. That's it for the fire report for this evening.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. You just commented to the next meeting.
Special meeting?
Thank you.
Date to be decided? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to the admin staff reports now. The COVID report from our CAO, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. Basically, this is our next monthly meeting, next monthly update regarding COVID. The report basically speaks for itself, so I won't spend much time on it, but I will announce that, as referenced in the report, the regulations related to the Step 3 vaccination requirements for certain facilities were released this afternoon. We finally have them in our possession. They are due to come into effect within the next 2 weeks. So we are currently reviewing the details and how they will apply to our facilities. At present, it would appear that the arena is the main facility to which the provincial regulations apply. And at this time, our focus is on establishing the necessary protocols and ensuring that we have the appropriate practices and policies in place to implement the provincial rules regarding vaccinations, fully vaccinated people attending the arena. Again, the regs are just out today, so we are running through all of that. Aside from that, I'll answer any questions or try to answer any questions that members might have.
Okay, we'll just put a motion on the floor then that this admin staff report 24, 2021 respecting COVID impact be received as information. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor McClellan and Councillor Van Vliet. And any discussion or questions to the CAO? Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So as the policy reads right now, you have to be double vaxxed if you're 12 or 11 and a half, what have you, the number is, to get in, to go into the arena, right? So you can't, we're not putting that on groups like OMHA, we already know where they are. But people can't privately rent the ice unless they're double vaxxed.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I've just had the most preliminary review of the regulation this afternoon prior to this meeting. But as I understand it, youth under the age of 18 that are attending the arena in order to participate in an event or to use the facility do have an exemption. But if youth or any other person are attending the arena to spectate, not participate in the activities, they are required to be double vaxxed, full vaccinations.
Just for clarity, so coaching staff would have to be double vaxxed if they're over what age?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that it's coaching staff do need to be double vaxxed. It's only the participants in the actual activity. So for youth hockey, it's the youth that are playing the games. It's my understanding, as it stands now, that that everyone else in that facility needs to be vaccinated fully. Again, we're reviewing the regulation that came out this afternoon. We're making sure that we are interpreting it correctly and consistently with all the other municipalities in Niagara Region and across the province.
Okay, because I'm getting a lot of questions already, so.
Okay, and just as a reminder to put your questions through the mayor and try to keep our protocol in place and so that meetings are nice and orderly. Okay, any other questions on that? Seeing none, that's on the floor. All those in favor of receiving that report? And that is carried. Thank you. Bylaw staff report, discharge of firearms review, BESR 007-2021. Is Mr. Tardif with us this evening?
Mr. Tardif is not. However, Mr. Gudgeon is present this evening, and is able to respond to any questions.
Okay. Get a report from Mr. Gudgeon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to all members of council, this report that's before you here represents a review of the 2013 discharge of firearms bylaw number 25. Council had, in a past meeting, asked that such a review be conducted. And so what you have before you is the results of that review that arose out of some complaints that were received from residents, primarily around the discharging of firearms across rivers from other municipalities, as well as trespassed property for the purposes of hunting. And this review reviewed the bylaw with those types of complaints in mind, and the results are before you.
Mr. Mayor, and just to build on that, if I could, I know our officer was in touch with all the other abutting municipal partners in enforcement. Included as an attachment to the bylaw are the discharge of firearms bylaws that exist in those other municipalities. And likewise, the officer consulted with, I want to call it MNR because that's the old name and they changed the name of that ministry quite frequently. But natural resources and the rules and regulations that are in place at the provincial level regulating hunting and hunting type activities. So just wanted to build on that as well.
Okay, and to put that into real simple lay language for those listening, because there are 11 signatures here of people who are curious about it. What is the actual rule there for firing along Highway 27 there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll take a stab at this, Lee, or did you want to?
Oh, go ahead. I can always build on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The general sort of assessment that staff came to was that the province of Ontario does have sufficient rules and regulations regarding discharging firearms while in the course of hunting, as well as rules regarding trespass to property that clearly address the key concerns raised by the neighboring property owners in Wainfleet. And as such, the staff feel that it's appropriate that rather than attempting to further amend our own bylaws to mimic or regurgitate provincial rules, that those provincial rules should dominate, and any sort of complaints or concerns regarding those activities can be dealt with by those provincial agencies. Again, whether it's the Natural Resources Enforcement Officers or Niagara Regional Police with respect to trespass issues.
Okay, thank you. And that was originally what they were looking for, was for us to become involved and invoke some ruling there. Our research has shown that there's lots of law in place to deal with the situation, both provincially and federally in some respects. And so that to those folks, we've looked at it, we've assessed it, and had a conversation just a couple days ago with one of the ladies there, advising that it was probably going to remain within the jurisdiction of the province to deal with through MNR and any other agencies. So that's where that stands. So to all those residents, of which there's 11 on the list here, we very much thank you for your concern here. And I just ask that in the future, any issues happen, you need to phone the police or phone Ministry of Natural Resources conservation officers, and they'll deal with those situations probably much better than we would be able to. So, okay, so Councillor Cridlin?
Thank you, and thank you for raising all the points that the staff have covered. I think I also read in there that they also learned through their research that there's actually more staff being hired at this moment at the level that we're hoping is going to be able to help them. So I think that's also some encouragement for the residents that have the issue. So again, status quo can also be very effective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So can I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive this report, BESR 007-2021, respecting our review of the discharge of firearm bylaw, and that it be received as information. Mover, Councillor Gilmore, seconded by Councillor McClellan. Is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None. That is carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to our drainage staff report, the memorandum regarding the partial abandonment CSW drain, and I think we have our drainage superintendent online. So over to you, please, Mark.
Great. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this memo summarizes the actions that were completed under Section 84 of the Drainage Act, as per council's direction respecting Drainage Staff Report 14, the partial abandonment of the consolidated South Wainfleet Drain Number 1. The township received no requests following the communications with the impacted landowners, and as recommended in Drainage Staff Report 14, the next step is for this bylaw, which is included as an attachment to the memo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the motion being that the memorandum from the drainage superintendent respecting partial abandonment of CSW drain be received as information. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Cridlin, Councillor Van Vliet. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, recorded vote, or no, not a recorded vote. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. So used to doing recorded votes for over a year, so. Okay, moving on to the Public Works Staff Report 21-2021, Award of Engineering Services for Township of Wainfleet Community Complex Renovation. And Will is dealing with that one, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, I will try to speak to this report from the Manager of Operations, who unfortunately isn't able to join us this evening. Essentially, by way of background, in 2019, the township made application under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, a grant that had been announced in 2019 under the Community, Culture, and Recreation stream. It was one of the few grants available at the time, and the township had previously identified a project at the community complex area to make various improvements. The improvements were actually detailed in a Parks and Recreation master plan that was developed by the community through an engagement process starting in almost 10 years ago now, proceeding through and sort of wrapping up by around 2012, 2015. Part of that Parks and Recreation Master Plan included some significant arena improvements, and those were completed a number of years ago. The second sort of phase of the recommendations included a number of improvements to the complex itself. And an extract from that Parks and Rec Master Plan is attached to the report. And basically, staff used that extract and phase 2 of the project as the basis for our financial application to the grant program. The grant program itself is a 3-way program using funds from the federal government, the province of Ontario, and the municipality itself to provide for capital infrastructure works in this sort of community services area of the project. What the township is proposing to do, as outlined in both the Recreation Master Plan and the grant application, is undertake some works to improve field drainage on all of our sports facilities in the area, undertake some works to improve driveways, lighting, ball diamonds, tennis courts, washroom upgrades to make them accessible and usable for over a greater range of time, a new pavilion to be added to the facility, as well as a proposed walking track, which was detailed in the master plan. At this stage, we have received confirmation from the feds and the province that we are allowed to proceed with the process of conducting the improvements. And this is the first phase of that project, which is engaging an engineer to assist with the design and the works necessary to make the project happen. The project itself is a multi-year project, and when we made application to the feds in the province, the goal was to smooth out the tax impact of this project over a number of years. And over the last budget cycle, Council has already started taking steps and putting allocations away to fund this. So there's not going to be any sort of massive property tax impact by doing this. So at this stage, the operations manager has gone to market, has sought engineering firms that will be able to accomplish or undertake the works specified, and has come back with a recommendation that we proceed with the firm of, Spriet and Associates.
Okay, so thank you, Will, for that. The motion being that this report respecting award for engineering services for Township of Wainfleet Community Complex renovation be received, and that Council direct the Manager of Operations to engage the services of Spreet Associates to perform engineering services for the design and contract administration for the Township of Wainfleet Community Complex renovation. A mover and a seconder to put that on the floor, Councillor Cridlin and Councillor McClellan. Is there any discussion? Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what exactly is the engineer going to be designing if we don't know what we want?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, one of the key elements of the project includes improved drainage works, and it will be sort of the technical, if you will, design works associated with that, in conjunction with the other projects of the element that require engineering assessments. So that will include citing of various elements of the project, where exactly they can go, how they will fit into the existing sort of landscape that's out there, and hopefully that will provide us the groundwork that will let us, similar to the way the architect, if you will, prepared a design to go to tender, that will give us the design work that will allow us to proceed to the next phases of the project.
Okay, if I could continue, Mr. Mayor. Since the landscape of Wainfleet itself has changed in the last 10, 15 years, I think is what you said, should we maybe go to the public and ask what they want? Like, I'm not sure if another pavilion is needed when we barely use the one we have, or if people even know there is a pavilion back there and there's a little one across the road. Like, should we maybe ask the public how we should be spending this money?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As I say, the grant application was based on the assumption that the recommendations in the Parks Master Plan would represent the needs of the community, both on the day that it was the day that it was originally adopted or presented, and into the long term of the future. On page 3. I want to say, starting on page 327 of 333 of your agenda package, that phase 2 of the sort of complex improvements is the project, if you will, that was pitched to the province, and it does represent the sort of exhaustive result of the consultation that occurred earlier, I guess it's less than 10 years ago-ish, in the township. That said, while there certainly has been change that has occurred, by and far, I think Wainfleet, for the most part, has not significantly changed in its either composition or structure or size that you would see significant deviation from what was contained in the plan. I do note that the plan in phase 2 identified the sports complex, and it goes on to further identify other facilities beyond step 2 or phase 2, including things such as skateboard facility, targeted programming, potentially a splash pad, but those being viewed seem to be farther on the horizon than the sort of stage 2 elements which we included in the grant application. Certainly we're at the direction of council, but again, we have based all of our sort of work and assumptions on this on the hard work that was put into this original plan, and sort of continuing or seeing it to fruition as we move along.
Okay, thank you. Interesting enough, along that line too, I got 2 phone calls this summer about a splash pad. Why don't we have a splash pad? Which surprised me very much. And I've asked a few people about the walking trail that is proposed, and I expected to receive, what do we need that for? When in fact they were, what a great idea that when the kids are playing soccer, I can walk around, and again, I was surprised. So when these things come forward, I ask as many people as I can when I run into them out in public about what are your thoughts on this and what are your thoughts on that. And so it's often surprising what we think is going to be the answer, and it's often something different. So the splash pad, though, I can see that having to happen someday down the road, or a skateboard park. The kids are wanting that as well, so it's interesting. Okay, so any other discussion? Councillor Cridlin.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. And again, I think really just to thank staff for working to get the grant. So it's an opportunity for Wainfleet to receive some of the common tax dollars that are out there. And I think with COVID, I think people are more invested in outdoor activities. So I think we have a chance here to, create that space or invest in that space at a time where it's going to be really beneficial. So thank you for the work.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, then we'll have the vote, the motion to receive the report and to give that direction to the manager of operations to begin the process with Spreet Associates. All those in favor of receiving that and giving that direction? And that is unanimously carried. Thank you. Review of correspondence. Is there any items of correspondence that council would like to discuss, lift? Okay, seeing none, we move on to our bylaws then. Bylaw number 29/2021 being a bylaw to provide abandonment of a section of the consolidated South Wainfleet Drain number 1 for drainage works in the Township of Wainfleet in the region of Niagara be read and passed this 14th day of September 2021. And mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor McClellan and Councillor Gilmore. Any discussion on that? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Are there any notices of motion for this evening? Seeing none. Any other business? No, seeing none. Okay, bylaw to confirm proceedings of council. That's bylaw number 30/2021 being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the actions of the council at its meeting held on the 2nd day of September 2021 and the 14th day of September 2021. Mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Cridlin and Councillor Gilmore. Any discussion? Seeing none. And the vote on that, please. That is unanimously carried. Thank you. If there's no other business of council, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.